We'll call this regular meeting of Garrett Park Town Council to order. The first matter of business is approval of the agenda. I would like to entertain a motion to approve the agenda as circulated with 3 changes. One will be moving, these are all moving from one category to another, removing the action item for the contract authorization I'm sorry, need to find it, authorization for execution of lease with Island Joe Group to the consent agenda. The other change would be moving the current action item, contract authorization for development phase services, to prior to the town manager's report. And the third would be moving the action item regarding introduction of ordinance 20251 to unfinished business. If there is no objection to those proposed moves, I will entertain a motion.
Okay, this is Jerry Lee. So you want to move the introduction to unfinished business. Are
Yes.
you then saying it would not be introduced tonight?
We would discuss it, but not introduce it.
Okay, I'm okay with that.
All right.
It's the one on the.
2025-1.
From action to unfinished business.
Oh, okay, I got it. Sorry.
We're
Is there
Fine with
deferring it.
me.
a motion to approve the agenda with those?
I'll make
Changes.
the motion to approve the agenda with those 3 changes.
All right.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
That brings us to the consent agenda, which now consists of the approval of the January 13 council minutes, my appointments to the archives and historic preservation committees, and the election judges, the authorization of change orders 2 and 3 for the SFMS contract, and the authorization of the Island Joe Group lease. I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda as so described.
Second.
Second.
All in
Aye.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Presentations by residents. Are there any?
We have one,
Well, these actually are.
double duty. It's 2 online. Oh, it's 2 online, yeah.
We have several folks online, but
Is anyone on the Zoom call who wishes to make a presentation? All right, that brings us to the action item, which was just moved up on the agenda, which is the contract authorization for design development phase services for town hall renovation. The contract approval would be for the proposal submitted by Wiedemann Architects dated 10 February. To get this on the table for discussion, do I hear a motion to authorize the design development phase contract?
I just have a question. When do they have a date of how long it's going to take?
Greg, do you want to, where did he go? There he is.
6 months.
6 months. Okay.
You still need a motion to get it.
I still need, in order to just
make
get
a
it on the
motion. So that'll
table
be
for
July
discussion, I would
2025.
prefer we do so in the
I'll
context
make
of
a
a motion.
motion to authorize the contract for design development services.
And a second?
I'll second.
Very good. It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? We've all received the memo from Barb, and looking at the Wiedemann letter of February 10, I was particularly appreciative of the sort of bullet point presentation of what is involved. That is what the contract covers, including dealing with the Maryland Historical Trust, the county over the mandatory referral provisions, and so on. So we'll start. Does anyone have questions with respect? And we should have noted, I think, for the record, that Greg Wiedemann is on the Zoom portion of this meeting.
One of the
I'm
questions I
available to
had would
answer any
be,
questions you may have.
that'd be great. This one may be straight to you, Greg. I guess when I skimmed through it, like I was, at first I was thinking I was reading a proposal for everything through design and with construction administration services, but then when rereading it, it seemed like some of the consultants may be doing up through DD and others are doing through the whole way. Am I misreading it, or is that the intent?
This proposal does not include any of the consultant services beyond DD.
Okay.
Some of them included what those fees would be, but they're
Okay.
not part of the scope.
So this is comprehensive services up through DD, 65%-ish.
Yes.
Okay. So do you have kind of a rule of thumb on comparative costs for like the CD and CA on top of a DD for a project like this? Just more for general knowledge of everyone else here, or what to expect.
And
Um,
are we all clear on the acronyms? Construction
yeah.
development and construction administration, is that correct? Have I guessed right?
Very close. So design development gets you up to about 2/3 of the way through construction. Construction documents would be the full
Ah,
permit ready drawings and the specifications, everything you would need to bid. And Greg will hopefully correct me on anything I'm forgetting, and be able to get you to permit. And then you would, during the construction phase, once you award a bid, you would have architects and engineers on call to answer questions, resolve disputes in construction, clarify details. That's the construction administration CA.
thank you.
Generally, as a general guide, the fee through DD is about 35% of the total fee. CDs is about 40%. So I consider DD, and as stated by the consultants, essentially a 50% CD set.
Okay.
The intention is to capture all critical pieces of the scope and to satisfy the cost estimator's requirements for certain details.
And usually a CA number, would you include that in the CD, or that would be another?
So about 75% of the total fee is through CDs, and then about 25% is in construction administration.
Okay. So we'd be looking in all likelihood of potentially approving the amount that's on here, but then we would have to come back, and to really get the job totally finished, it would be that much and then some.
That's correct. This is about halfway to a set of drawings that would be needed for permit and for construction and final bid.
And it'll be ready by just this July? Is that kind of your schedule? About 6 months?
Or August, I guess. Yeah, I mean, assuming we get started, we're prepared to start immediately upon executing of the contract. So
You want to ask about the estimation phase?
All right, yeah, I guess, I had a question about the estimating phase, like they're in Illinois. I'm wondering if it would be possible maybe to hold that out separate. Just so we could discuss it here perhaps, and then see if there's more appetite for like a local estimator. I don't know whether it would be better or not per se. It was just a thought I had.
Right, right. We're certainly open to pulling that portion of it out and exploring other firms. But I did want to tell you that although the firm is based in Illinois, it has a Bethesda, Maryland office.
Do they do small projects like the size of this project generally?
They were comfortable giving the estimate. When you look at their website, they, of course, advertise larger projects.
Right.
If the council decides to pull that portion out of the proposal, we could see other options for other firms that it's difficult. Yeah, it's sometimes difficult on a smaller project to find a cost estimator that's well suited. So,
Right.
This one especially so, I guess that perhaps you had the same troubling thought on it. It's a frame construction, so it's almost a little bit similar to a house, but then a residential contractor wouldn't really be sophisticated enough to estimate this as a commercial building. And you get a lot of the commercial firms that might do estimating, I would think might be doing more, larger offices and whatnot with concrete and other types of construction that I just don't know if this is like a little spot in the middle that's hard to source. So.
Well, you raise a good point, Stephen. I think, in the private sector, we would typically invite a contractor to do a preliminary price and just have them among the final bidders. But I understand that the town is not in a position to have that arrangement. So
Yeah,
it's
a tricky one.
May I ask a question while Stephen's
Mhm.
thinking about his next one?
Mhm.
Greg, I noticed that this does not cover the environmental study work. When would that work be done? And I realize it's maybe more of a question for Barb. Does the state grant require any kind of specific environmental study requirements that need to be done before you get this far with your design development work?
What will, not that I recall, Jerry, but what happens is the project will be put out in the state clearinghouse, and then agencies have the opportunity to ask questions or to impose requirements, such as what happened with Yandel with MHT, for example. But I don't recall anything specific.
So then back to you, Greg. Thank you.
Examination of the conditions of the soil is included, as is a preliminary stormwater management design. So in terms of drainage and stormwater management, that is part of this preliminary stage.
Okay, and I know the town is already in consultation with the County Historic Preservation. Does this include any consultation, further consultation on your part with County Historic Preservation?
Yes, it does. Both with an initial consultation with the staff, and then a conceptual approval from the Historic Preservation Commission, and a presentation to the Maryland Historic Trust.
Okay, thank you. I'll just state that we are still, for my colleagues, we are still in the running for a potential federal grant. If we were to get approved for a federal grant, and I realize that that is a unlikely proposition at this point. But if we were, we would have been expected to do an alternatives analysis before getting the federal funding. So we would,
Alternatives of what?
at least 3 different options, a no action alternative. And I think we have in some ways done it, but we would need to summarize the alternatives we have considered up until this point. So we might have to go back if we were to get put back into the running for that funding and document the alternatives analysis we've been doing thus far in order to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act. I don't think it's an issue because we're probably not in the running for that
Right.
funding anymore. But I just wanted to state that because if we get too far along and we can't go back, then
Right.
we would just get cut off entirely for any federal funding. It sounds like that's not an issue for the state, so I think we're okay with the state grant.
Is there, so it sounds like you're saying we would need to do an EA if we got to that point, but I guess, do you see anything where there might be trouble to go backwards if we had to?
Well, we've been doing all the right
jumble something.
things. We're consulting with the historic preservation for a
Mhm.
building like this. That's the biggest thing. And then any new ground disturbance out back
Yeah,
could potentially be, as long as we're staying in the footprint and we're following up on the historic preservation, I believe we'd be okay. And we did an alternatives analysis, which we
Yeah.
have done. We
Mhm.
just haven't summarized it in the kind of document that
Yeah.
they would expect.
yeah. Yeah, I think even in the scheme that we're looking at, we would be expanding slightly out the back and then taking things off the front. So maybe by rule, we might end up having to have further parts into a study like that showing it wouldn't be just, it would be more disturbance, but yeah, it's just,
Right, but the testing perhaps, I mean, when we get to that point, if we thought there was going to be, we could, I think we just need to keep that in mind as we get a little closer. And by then we should have more knowledge of whether there's any hope at
Yeah.
all.
I wonder if we couldn't just pull that together in like a couple months if we really had to, but,
I think for this scope, we probably could. I just
Yeah.
wanted to flag that.
okay. Greg, I had another question too. I mean, when I was going through the prices, like a lot of them seem kind of normal percentage wise relative to each other, which is kind of like architect prime relative to like structural on MEP, but then the civil price jumped out at me. It was like 51,000 out of the 168, including the estimator, but I didn't dive into it fully, but I was curious like, what might be driving that price when it's only like a simple rectangular site. We're not really doing elaborate landscaping or stormwater or utilities or anything.
First of all, the 53, please don't get confused when the consultants have quoted a CD phase as well as a
Okay.
DD phase.
Oh, I jumped ahead. Yeah. So
So it's about
I
half
gotta
of
take it
that
earlier.
for the DD phase.
Got it. Okay. 23.
I mean, as you
I feel
know,
like-
stormwater
yeah.
management and a number of other issues become, major issues, even on small projects. I did solicit a second proposal, and it was higher.
Okay.
I approached Cass Engineering, which has done a lot of work with us, and their fee was higher.
Okay. Curious, who do you have for noise? Do you need civil on the noise project, the library?
Yes, AdTech is actually doing the civil for noise.
Okay. I just looked out of curiosity about the project across the street from that, the Warner Circle. It sounds like it's finally going into construction to turn it into condos, but I noticed
That's
Wiles
right.
Mensch is still on that is civil. And they were the folks I worked with on the master plan for it. So I don't know if it's worth trying them as a third alternate or not.
I'm happy to get a proposal from them. I did reach out to them and I never got an answer.
It was
Uh-oh.
strange. Maybe because they're in Virginia, but yeah.
Yeah,
If you wouldn't mind, maybe ask them again and just stress that it's like right down the road from where they've already worked. So.
happy to do that.
Appreciate it. When I worked with them over there, we had to break into the building, so we didn't have keys. So we broke in the nursing home.
Usually people are trying to go the other way. All right, now I'm sorry, I've sort of lost the bubble. So with respect to just the ad tech quote of 51.2, is the entirety of that included in your current proposal or just the design development?
Just the design development. That's true of each of the consultants.
Okay, great. I just wanted to be certain I wasn't misreading. Are there other questions or discussion?
Maybe just a thought. It might help all of us, like if we could get the list of consultants, what their DD, their CD, and their CA cost might be, and kind of a matrix if the town staff wouldn't mind doing that, or unless it's more appropriate for Greg's office to do it. It might help us, a lot of us, just kind of see
Where we are.
yeah, where we are, what's coming, even if there's a TBD on things that we don't have a bid for.
Stephen, are you suggesting?
Well, some of those are included in attachment B,
Yeah,
Yeah, I guess.
I believe.
It's-
The mechanical engineer, the structural engineer, and the civil engineer all provided
Okay.
CD phase.
Jerry Lee, you had a question?
Are you suggesting that this would just be additional information the town staff would provide us, even though we would authorize it tonight? Or are you suggesting that we would not authorize it tonight and wait a month?
They're more just for general information, just kind of tracking.
I just wanted to double check the intent.
Yeah. So it sounds like, Greg, that all the consultants, their work would be, they have a CD price to you, and then you would need to prepare one for your own firm, I guess, when you have more information down the road. Is that correct?
That was what I thought was, that's right. And,
Okay. And then Geotech, like, do you even need them to go past DD, or do they count for CD too?
we wouldn't expect to.
Okay.
Um,
So structural, MEP, and civil, like you said, are all, they're showing the future work.
right.
That's it for me.
is there any further discussion? Are we prepared to vote on the proposal as a whole, or do we need to do more work on the estimation phase sufficient that we would like to break that out? If I could get just an informal read of the council.
So what's the total that we're approving for this phase?
If we were to vote to authorize the contract,
Right.
the amount is 160.
And there's I neglected to put this in the memo, but there's an allowance for $1,000 in reimbursable expenses.
So it would be 166,850.
Okay. And then do we want a contingency in there, or we just want to just keep it that number?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Do we
catch-
want to add a 5% or 10% contingency so we don't have to go back if there's cost overruns, or do we want to just
Now,
make
this,
it that number? Is my question.
Since this is just at the design stage,
Yeah.
I guess I defer, but there shouldn't be cost overruns at the design stage, should there?
Yeah.
This is a
No.
firm bid, right?
It would only be if we ask for something totally different
Or
than
if
what
we
we've
make
asked
some
for before.
changes.
You know, if we say to design a pergola out front or something like that, that would be,
Yeah.
That's correct.
or add the fencing in or something.
All right.
Or stormwater.
I would go for the whole approving it now.
I would too, especially if we could authorize the full amount and empower the town manager, the mayor, and Stephen to work with Mr. Wiedemann on the cost proposal. Like I don't think we have to approve, but perhaps we do. We're approving the full contract, but we could perhaps put some language in our authorization that we are open to a substitution there that is approved by that small group.
All right.
Okay.
That seems very reasonable and pragmatic because we don't want to lose
Right.
whatever momentum we have here. So it has been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Anything from residents? Very well. It's been moved and seconded that we authorize the design development phase services for town hall renovation as presented by Wiedemann Architects in their letter of February 10. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you for your time, Greg. I know
Absolutely.
Greg.
Congratulations.
dinner time,
Congratulations.
Thank you. We look forward to it.
right?
We'll have some change orders soon.
We'll have to get them dinner the next time. So
At least
it's always
two.
dinner time.
All right. Thank you.
That brings us to the town manager's report.
Thank you. This will be a brief one. At your last meeting, I kind of gave you the overall picture since we were 6 months into the fiscal year. So there's not much new for January. I would just note, if you look at the December report, it looked like our investment revenues were lagging. As I mentioned at the meeting, we have a lot of our investment portfolios with the Montgomery County Investment Pool as well as M&T Advisors. They both provide earnings reports on a quarterly basis, and that information was not available for the December report. If you look at investment revenues as of January 31st, year to date is actually exceeding where we were last year. And part of that is we have moved a lot more money into the county investment pool because it does tend to yield better rates. Only other thing I was just going to mention, it's a nominal amount of money, but we did get our second reimbursement from the state for under our MOU for Strathmore Avenue. This is the maintenance work we perform in the right of way and any tree related activities. So we did get our second reimbursement, which was roughly about $1,300 so far, and we have brought in just about $4,000. If there's no questions about the financial report, I'll just kind of keep moving on. Just wanted to thank our residents who participated in the latest stage for the Yendel Park design. I know many of you were there. We did have a good turnout at the community meeting held on January 22nd. Kayla took the lead in making sure that we were primed to basically accommodate feedback from residents who could not be at town hall on the 22nd. She and Mike Norton recorded a video that people could basically listen to, kind of sharing some of the same information that Mike Norton presented at the meeting, talking about the community feedback and that we had received at the first meeting, some of the constraints on the site and things that factored into their preparation of the 3 designs. That video that Kayla and Mike Norton did was posted on our YouTube channel. And then the 3 conceptual designs that were presented on the 22nd were also stationed in the post office with comment cards for approximately 2 weeks. So we did have 91 residents that submitted comment cards after reviewing the concept designs, which we were pretty pleased with. Obviously, we always wish we could get more residents participating. So Norton Land Design will be looking at that feedback from the comment cards and basically kind of determining the next step in terms of preparing a design that, at least as the contract is envisioned now, does have them presenting a design at a town council meeting. This next item is just more kind of a statement for the record. You all are certainly well aware of that, but on November 12th of last year, the town council authorized Beveridge and Diamond, which is a law firm that we had retained, to prepare a letter for submission to the Office of the County Attorney regarding stormwater management within Garrett Park. Beveridge and Diamond did send that letter to the county attorney on January 23rd. So it's kind of been in their hands for just roughly 2 weeks. I did check in with Beveridge and Diamond today. They have not received yet a response from the county, which isn't surprising. It's only been about 2 weeks. They'll keep you posted on that. And then just lastly, just want to once again give a shout out to our members of the maintenance team. This has been sort of a brutal winter for all concerned, but particularly for them. And obviously we're gearing up for yet another snow event tomorrow. So that concludes my report for this evening. As far as what I submitted, be happy to answer any questions. The only other item I wanted to mention is some of you may have been expecting to see Budget Amendment 1 on the agenda. We are working, continuing to work on that. There were some issues that Mary needed a little bit more time to think about, and also I needed to take the various ARPA things and make them fit into the Treasury Department box, which will require some refinement on our end. Mayor Keller and I did talk about this, and I think we anticipate bringing that budget amendment forward for introduction at the special town council meeting that will be held on February 24th.
Yeah, I want to commend the staff, Barbara and our contract accountant, Mary Rutke, because the ARPA funds were not expended in one place, and for a variety of other reasons, it's a complex undertaking to reconcile these funds. They've been working extraordinarily hard, and we simply want to be sure we've achieved a comfort level with that before we reflect it in a proposal for a mid-year adjustment. The ARPA undertaking is a one-time event, both for purposes of the for purposes of the accounting reconciliation that needs to take place, and one time in the sense that we want to get it right and then we move on. So the February 24 meeting, which I've inaccurately been referring to as a work session, is in fact a special meeting of the town council. That means that we can introduce the mid-year adjustments at that meeting 2 weeks from today. The requirement for, and it gets introduced as an ordinance, the requirement for an ordinance is that it can be adopted anytime after 6 days. So the regular council meeting in March will provide us the opportunity to adopt those mid-year adjustments. Ideally, we would also like to introduce at that time the FY26 budget. Stay tuned. We will retain that as an aspiration, but a lot depends on a lot of moving parts. And I think at some point we have to address the elephant in the room, which is that the federal situation may directly or indirectly affect us, and we have to think about that a bit. Planning a budget always involves a certain amount of projection, a certain amount of assumptions. They're complicated at certain points by things beyond our control. 14 years ago, it was the recession. This is potentially a little larger. So, anything further on the issues raised in the manager's report?
I want to make sure I heard you correct, Chris. Like you were saying that the 224 meeting, we would aim to introduce the mid-year adjustments, and then the next council meeting, I can't remember what the date was. It was at March. Did you say the day?
It's the same day as today, right? 9th,
10th.
10th.
Okay. So then the goal would be to vote on the mid-year, and then
On March 10.
then February 24, the other half of the meeting would be, or the other goal of the meeting would be the budget work session still. And then with the aim that the earliest we might be able to introduce the next full budget would be 310. Did
Correct.
I? Okay.
The last item being aspirational.
Yeah. Earliest we can do
Yeah.
it. So,
Right.
I had a question just for
It would
the,
be an advance on last year when it wasn't introduced until April and voted in May.
yeah, a little more breathing room. And Jerry Lee has pushed over that, I think, every year, so. And then Barb, question on the street paving or like taking care of the streets by the town staff. Have they noticed any like unusual or unexpected damage with salt or cracking or anything like that that we may need to look ahead to?
They have not. Typically, as part of our budget process, I do have Clark Azar come out and just sort of update the roadway assessment.
Okay.
Just to see. I'm hesitant to do that until we get through the upcoming snow events, just because the freeze and thaw cycle is what kind of does a number on the pavement. But we will make sure we do that as we're working on the budget. If winter ever ends, right now it's not feeling like it will, but.
So it sounds like there's a possibility we might have that for 224, but perhaps not if the snow keeps up.
We can at least go ahead and do a kind of a preliminary assessment. If I can get someone from Clark Azar out here, I will. Obviously, as all of you know, I have a bit of a commute, and I can say the roads in Howard County and the roads in parts of Montgomery County are not looking really great. There's some pretty big potholes.
Yeah, that's why I asked. It was looking pretty
Yeah.
bad. Okay.
On that note, Barb, I know that our town maintenance staff works very hard, long hours to clear the roads and all of that. It is, and I think the communication that the town office did during the last storm really did improve the resident clearing of sidewalks from what I've seen in the past. However, the thing I've noticed is that the entrances at the corners onto Strathmore Avenue are not at all accessible. So what happens is people have to walk out into the middle of two different streets to get to the crosswalk. And so if the maintenance crew could maybe at least just help out at the corners a little bit, because I think people see those as no man's land and they don't see them as part of their job to clear the sidewalk, the entrances to the crosswalks.
That is certainly the case with some of them, and we did notice that. I'm trying to remember the cross street. Chris may be able to help me out, but I think it was at one of the intersections. I know that the
Oxford and Kenilworth.
the elementary school had actually reached out about that. So they do focus somewhat on that, but I do agree with you that we did have some communication with certain homeowners who had not cleared their sidewalks. In one case, it was someone who was a tenant who I think simply wasn't on some of the communications. In another case, it was someone who a sidewalk was put in front of their home as part of SRTS, and I think there was perhaps some miscommunication in the past about whose responsibility was what. So we did clarify that with them.
Thank you.
Good. So on unfinished business, let's start with the first in the published ordinance, the published agenda. The ordinance amending section 403 with respect to variances. This is really just for discussion at this point. With the notion that if we can resolve any questions or concerns we had, we can consider introducing it next time. I had a few questions myself that I've had a sort of a preliminary discussion with the staff. Looking at the text of the proposed ordinance with changes reflected on page 3 of the material that Barb's circulated. Section 2 applies to a public hearing on each variance. And the first portion essentially codifies what we had always tried to adhere to, which is having the application be far enough in advance of the council meeting at which it would be heard that adequate notice can be provided. And that seems, the language proposed there seems an adequate response to that. Further on at the bottom, there is language with respect to physically posting notice on the property itself. My concern there is that the sign proposed is essentially just a sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11. The sign we currently use is about 2 by 4 and can be seen easily from a passing car, and I would prefer that. Is there any discussion of that? We can simply ask for language increasing the size. Does anyone have any thoughts on
Do
that?
we want it to be laminated so it doesn't get wet? and
Well,
fall
yeah, we
apart?
don't put that in the ordinance, but yes,
Yes,
Yes.
okay,
I mean, that only makes sense.
right.
yeah.
Can I assume that there must be somewhere upper level that defines what days are? Because there's the old calendar day versus business day. And I don't know if that's defined further up in our ordinances, or do we need to define it here?
I think typically it's interpreted to be calendar days unless otherwise noted, in my experience.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure it actually wasn't business days, because to me, I mean, if I were somebody, I'd be looking at calendar
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for the
And-
sign, you're suggesting a 2 foot by 4 foot?
Yes, I think that's,
Is that kind of what the county does for a development application?
Yeah.
Yeah.
no, that's even larger. That's like
I guess that's like a billboard.
3 by 5. I think our current one is adequate. It's also very economical in the text it uses.
Mhm.
So there's a large font variance on it, which catches the eye. And the rest of it is relatively limited and straightforward and essentially directs you to call the town office if you have any questions.
So we'll just change it to be whatever, somebody will measure the current sign and
Yeah.
we'll change it to be
Just
whatever.
have the,
I think that's reasonable. I did have one question. As I read this, it says the application must be to the council, which I understand the point of that. But I think that could be confusing to a resident. I assumed that we would, through our website communications, make clear that that means working with the town office staff. Or do we need to specify here the town manager?
I think our process is just to have people file their applications online anyway. So I think that's basically our process.
Okay. So in practice, the town staff is there in between that, but because it's the council decision, they're applying to the council.
Correct.
I just wanted to make sure that we were all clear about that and that that's not a change really from current process.
It is not.
Okay. I'm good with this.
Same with like
So
a-
the process would be if we're all consensus comfortable with it, we could introduce it next month?
yes.
Okay.
So we'll ask for slightly modified language with respect to the physical posting. People are comfortable with the other elements, the addition of the requirement of a boundary survey. Um, We have a comment from the chair of the Land Use Advisory Committee with respect to the provision on ultra small lots. And my take on that was that I take the point, but I think we need this provision on the books unless and until a different provision is provided in the actual building code with respect to a sliding scale or any other approach. I still think we need this provision.
I'm in
Um,
agreement because not all of our lots conform to
No.
the current guidelines for R90.
Any further discussion on this? Does the staff have enough guidance for
Yes,
moving to the next stage on that?
yes, thank you, we do.
Next is amending Chapter 4 of the Town Code to update building permit procedures and adding other elements. Again, Barb has provided a cover memo. I have one overarching consideration, not so much a concern, but just a consideration is, as we will detail a little later in the evening, there's been a lot of activity with respect to amendments to the state enabling provision that permits us to even have things such as setbacks and so on. And a lot of that has involved language with respect to describing buildings, structures, residences, because we need to make certain that it comports with other statutes, with proposals such as the governor's housing initiative. And in that sense, my thought is that although we can leave the language we have now, for example, on page 2 of the proposal, you see added language at the end or close to the bottom of the page, which adds a definition of the term main building. I think conceptually that's a very good idea to have a definition of a term that you then use in several instances, but it includes the term structure. Structure is one of those terms that's being sort of bandied about right now in terms of the amendments to the state statute. So I think when we finalize this for consideration, there needs to be a
Reconciliation.
universal top to bottom word check, and to make sure that it's reconciled with any other statutes that might affect it. Okay, I didn't articulate that very well, but structure in that definition sort of leapt out at me.
So basically what you're saying, we need to review the rest of our ordinances to make sure that we have the word structure defined and in the other ones as appropriate.
And that we aren't using it in a way that inadvertently doesn't somehow square with a fundamental provision like the state statute under which we're operating here.
definitions have been tricky altogether. It's a different topic, but in the past, talking with the chair of the land use committee before, it was just relying on a lot of the county definitions, say for like a basement or a cellar or like a, what's a roof overhang, so on and so forth. But we've been trying to get by with relying on their definitions without, so we don't have a 10-page list of definitions in ours. So it's been a balancing act. It'd be great to kind of clear it all up as we see what happens with the state and the county.
Another specific concern I have is now over on page 3, about 2/3 of the way down, the newly renumbered section 5 addresses the period of time that various permits will be valid. And my initial take was that most of that language seems to accomplish what it sets out to. I had one question. It is 3 lines up from the bottom of that underlined bolded material. A permit may be revoked if the work has stopped for 30 days. I would be a little more comfortable with something that gives us a little more leeway, or,
They might have to stop just because of weather.
well, yes. My concern was the other way around. If it's an absolute like stop, well, there are 2 concerns. Number one, elsewhere we refer to a stop work order. And it's important, I think, that we differentiate this concept of stopped from the work that stops by virtue of a stop work order. I'm also perhaps unduly influenced by recent examples we've seen in town where work progresses in an extraordinarily piecemeal fashion and gets attenuated to the degree that something really takes years from beginning to end. And in those cases, sometimes I've seen a half a day's work and then 3 months with nothing, or something delivered but not utilized for 6 or 8 weeks. And I would prefer, at least conceptually, and we can get from our attorney if there's better wording, I would prefer something on the order if work has substantially ceased. Acknowledging that that introduces a somewhat subjective element. I think it gives us more flexibility to say, no, notwithstanding the fact that you had an electrician in there 2 days ago to screw in light bulbs, your work has substantially ceased because nothing else has happened there for 5 months.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
we
I do,
lost a big house on Waverly with the divorce and all that, and they ended up tearing it down.
Yeah, it's sat for a couple of years.
Yeah.
yeah, I do think we're
I'm-
trying to strike a balance here,
Yeah.
because especially if you think about some of the supply chain issues that contractors have been dealing with, and homeowners too. I've been there where a contractor said, gosh, so sorry, I'll come back as soon as I can, but right now I can't get the supplies I need to do your job. And so they go work somewhere else until they can get their supplies, move around their schedule and come back to you. And the homeowner is kind of trapped between the town and the contractor and the supply chain. And particularly these last few years, the supply chain has been problematic. So I think we're trying to strike a balance where we don't want the same situation as that house on Kenilworth to happen. But at the same time, we don't want to be breathing down the necks of our residents who are doing the best they can, and it's not unreasonable what they're the scheduling that they're trying to work through with their contractor.
Yeah.
Could we add through no fault of the
Now,
contractor?
now, hold on, just keep in mind, this is with respect to us actively revoking, not the permit expiring. There's a provision in here that envisions the permit's about to expire, you've had unanticipated supply chain issues, you just seek an extension.
Right.
So what we're talking about is revoking.
Okay.
Right, and the May gives us some
Yeah.
flexibility, but I agree with you, the substantially ceased is a little more flexible than stopped.
Okay, so I have no pride of authorship. The notion is we ask the staff to approach our attorney and come up with language of that nature to reflect that concern on our part.
I'm curious, like, should 30 days be a little bit more generous to 60 or 90? Like, I guess I'm hearing that the goal might be if we don't really see movement and we worry that the contractor's going to kind of abandon the project for a very long time. We don't want it to be an eyesore or dangerous. Like,
Well,
would 60 or 90 be more fair for that?
devil's advocate,
Mhm.
30 days in December
Mhm.
when there are open, uncovered windows
Mhm.
in the winter is different than 30 days in the spring or the
Mhm.
summer when there's well covering of every
Mhm.
opening of the building. So the
Mhm.
building envelope on that Kenilworth building was just left open
Yeah.
to the elements
Yeah.
for months on end. Even 30 days would have been enough to destroy that building as it did.
Mhm. I guess I wasn't expecting that, I guess. So what's really the goal of doing it? I guess, is it to preserve?
It's to
Sometimes
preserve
they might have.
to preserve the town's right to
Okay.
intervene if a building is not being protected
Got it, yeah.
properly.
Okay.
But to not be so strong as to have the town bothering residents where they are protecting the building, they're just coming
Mhm.
up against
Okay.
supply chain issues.
Okay. So suspicion of like a potentially abandoned
Right.
project, which
We
is
don't- right,
most
we-
cases is going to get their attention to respond
Yeah.
anyway. So,
Right.
I would err on the side of trying to make sure that the building is not abandoned for too long, as I have had experiences with abandoned buildings causing rodents and other infestations. And so I think we want to prevent that at all costs.
I think that exactly that happened on the house on Kenilworth. So it
Mhm. There was also one on Strathmore
Mm-hmm.
where
was 2 years.
people
probably.
were breaking in
Yeah.
and there were fires,
Mhm.
things like that.
Are the recent constructions or?
They eventually more or less tore it down and built a new house when it changed.
Oh,
property.
yeah. That wasn't really a construction thing, though. That was my understanding. That was the people that were living there.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you look at the next page, page 4, there's this little laundry list there under new section 7 of conditions that the town manager can impose. Subsection E is in Edward, limits the locations upon which construction debris may be stored. In my experience in Garrett Park, there are also occasional issues with where construction.
I'm sorry, which number are you at again?
Okay, page 4.
Okay.
Letter C.
Letter E.
There's a provision that starts at the very bottom of page 3.
And welfare at the top underlined, and then you
Uh-huh.
have section E.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm being more verbose here. construction materials stored in the wrong place can also be problematic. So I'm going to ask that this be amended by including materials, so it would be locations upon which construction materials and debris may be stored,
Yeah, I think that's a
whether or
good
not
change.
such materials or debris are contained.
Isn't that covered under D?
C, actually, right?
Or is it C?
C.
Yes, C, you're right.
I wonder if they should be joined, like maybe C could cover materials and debris.
Yeah,
Yeah, perhaps it should just be put side by side there to
Yeah.
just make it flow.
I missed that. It's the same issue essentially.
Right.
Right, we
And
don't
it
want to
seems
put
to
too much
me-
weight on tree roots
And
in particular.
Yeah.
query whether those could be collapsed into a single,
Or at least put all right next to each other.
Yeah.
Well, and then number G gives us a lot of flexibility there too.
yeah.
It might not hurt for Ron Bolt to just kind of just look at the ordering of all those A through G in general. So you might want to say something about the tree protection plan first, and then all the things that are kind of drives that, like the storing of materials and whatnot. You may want to just reverse it all.
Yeah. Certainly my concern is motivated primarily by tree protection, but I've seen other cases where construction materials have been stored in the street
Mhm.
or
Right.
what have you. So. Okay. Page 6. If you drop down to 2.1B as in Baker, that establishes setbacks for accessory buildings. The base requirement being 5 feet or 10 feet for accessory buildings that are taller than 28 feet. 28 feet, I think, is a 3 or 2.5 story building, which I'm having difficulty envisioning as an accessory building. So
Yeah.
I guess the direction to staff would be to ask if 28-foot high accessory buildings are in fact permissible under county law.
May not be, because I think like a detached accessory dwelling unit has a limit that's less than that. I can't remember if it's 20 or 25 or 22 or something like that. And those are already required to be, I think it's 10 feet from the side yard, or it has to match the side setback. And I think there's like a 15 from the back. So they're a little bit different in there. But this would be odd if you had something that is larger than that.
So could we leave it at, we will ask
Mhm.
council to verify that?
Yeah, I think so.
If the answer is yes, we may want to take advantage of our authority under the same provision that gives us the right to regulate setbacks, to think about height longer term.
Mhm.
In the next provision, the minimum rear yard setback, since it's talking about the rear yard setback, I would like to modify the 2 references to the property line by adding the term rear. In other words, to make sure we're measuring from the rear property line and not just some random property line. Again, we would raise that with Ron Bolt if he has violent objection and can articulate the reasons why. I would revisit my desire to see that added, but otherwise, I'd like to see that.
28 is
Okay.
pretty,
I
28
didn't
is
mean
pretty
to
tall.
monopolize the
Yeah.
discussion here.
Just one final point, just for reference, 28 is pretty tall because 35, I believe, is the max
Yes,
you can do for a house. So
Yeah.
there's not much in between there.
yeah. Um, Does anyone else have anything they would care to discuss with respect to this? Swimming pools, you okay?
I have to reread again because we did discuss that last
Well-
time, didn't we? Sorry.
It's difficult.
So the question I had last time was about corner lots. Are
Yeah.
Where did that end up?
Yeah, I think you were asking if it made it
It's
kind of
it's
impossible to
Did it
put a
make it
pool.
impossible?
page 8. It's near the,
8G.
yeah, it's an added provision. And there's a comment attached to it.
Okay, so the town attorney is stating that that would be subject to a variance.
Yes,
Okay, I think as long as it's subject to a variance, I can live with it
okay.
as is. I have no intent of building a swimming pool, and I'm not necessarily in favor of swimming pools, but I just, I didn't want it to be an absolute impossibility
Mhm.
for any lot. As long as they have the variance process open to them, I'm okay with that.
And also on page 8, on number or letter B, is there any more of a fine that we can impose? I mean, that seems very low, doesn't it? For
that
all
is-
this nuisance?
Yeah, $1,000 is currently the maximum amount of a municipal infraction under state law.
Of any municipal infraction
Mhm.
in any
Yes.
municipality.
Yes. I think it's been
Well-
at that level as long as I've worked in the state,
To-
so. Yeah, probably not this year.
They'll have enough on their plates this
Yeah.
year.
Yeah. To the extent that that sounds a little low, look at the next one. Each day is regarded as a separate offense.
Okay,
So it adds up fast.
okay. That's reasonable.
So if there's nothing further on that, and staff, does the staff need any further guidance or,
No,
no?
I
Okay.
think we're fine. Thank you.
We will await developments. The next for discussion, rather than introduction, is right-of-way tree protection and maintenance. I ask that we defer introducing this as a proposed ordinance, which would oblige us to vote on it at the next meeting, because I still have an awful lot of questions that I think in consideration of our own time and efficiency in one thing and another might be better addressed in the context of an Arboretum Committee meeting or a meeting with our consulting arborist and our attorney, and ironing them out before sort of occupying the council's time with a lengthy discussion. I had particular questions about the definition of tree, which I think it may as I expressed earlier in another context, be a good idea to define things. But in this case, the definition proposed would exclude about what I would just horseback estimate to be 10 to 20% of our plants that we would ordinarily consider to be trees, simply by virtue of the fact that they are multi-stem trunks.
I also had a concern about that definition, and I did have an exchange via email with the arborist about that. So I would like us, maybe not tonight, but to think about where we might be able to put some additional flexibility into that definition. One option might be to note tagged and marked by the town in some way, if it's below 5 feet or something like that. It's tough because we don't want to have the town regulating all the little nuisance shrubs. But there is, for example, a specific, I'm going to call it a tree. It's a maple. It's an ornamental maple in front of the person who founded the Arboretum's former home.
Yeah.
That would not meet this definition of tree. And so I think the town wants to preserve that particular specimen, we will have to go to extraordinary measures of signage to protect it. It's just one example. And I think if it's just that one thing, then we could go to those great lengths to protect it in some way through signage or whatever. But there are others that are definitely below 5 feet that most of us would consider to be trees. So I do think we ought to, before we go final with that one, give it a little more thought.
And I did want to
committee is
clarify,
struggling with it too.
Phil Normandy, actually, most of this came from him.
Well,
So,
I
yeah,
know.
I just don't want to
and-
leave an impression that he was
and-
not involved in this, because he very much was.
And I didn't mean to imply he
Yeah.
wasn't. I know that you guys
Yeah.
have been talking it through. The committee has been talking it through.
Yeah.
It's a complex
Yeah,
situation.
I actually asked him about the 5 feet, not because of any specific tree, but just because the trees that we're putting into the ground are generally less than 5 feet tall when they're planted. We also, as I shared with the mayor earlier, also had a resident, though, everyone who has trees knows that little things drop and then start sprouting. And I think some of the reaction to the height was because this one resident was concerned that he could no longer pick up the little seedling trees that were forming, that somehow that would be a violation of the law.
Right.
So,
The bamboo can grow 5 feet in
Yeah,
like 2 days.
In a minute.
yeah, and this was not bamboo. This was not bamboo. This was just a
I know,
regular
but as an
tree. Yeah,
example,
yeah.
bamboo during certain times of the year will grow
Yes.
5 feet in just a day or two.
Yeah,
There are a bunch of other
So-
trees that come just from bird droppings that will grow fast.
that's,
like-
Yeah.
that's what this resident
a
was concerned
Virginia
about more
juniper,
than anything
yeah.
else.
Yeah. And I think in the end, we have to be really clear communication-wise about what our intent is, and that we are trying to strike a balance to protect the town's arboretum trees and special ornamental specimens. I'm not going to use the word shrub.
Mhm. You had to say it
Um,
like Monty Python if you do.
I know, it does feel very Monty Python.
Yeah, actually, Sean Conlon, as we were talking about this, had invoked, I think, the Monty
Yes,
Python
he did.
sketch
He-
that everyone
he
is
sent
thinking
around
about.
Monty Python.
Ron Bolt actually had jokingly referred to a penalty that included the word "knee" for those of you who know Monty Python as a penalty of if you violated this. Just by way of explanation too, I think as we tried to deal with the town resident shrubbery in the right of way versus our own, what the town attorney's preference had been was for Mr. Normandy to provide a list of any type of shrubs that could be embedded in the ordinance as things in the definition of trees. Mr. Normandy and I had some back and forth, and we sort of ended up with what he had provided in terms of evergreen hollies. Clearly, I know some of you have concerns beyond that specific species of either, they're sometimes shrubs, sometimes trees, sometimes in between, as I understand it.
Can we get a definition for shrub? Because right now shrub is like so vague. I mean, a weed could become a shrub.
I think for what we were the issue that we were trying to address from the last meeting, I don't know, we're having so much trouble defining trees. I hate to add a definition of shrubbery to it, but I think if there are certain types of shrubs that we as a local government are planting, I think that's where Mr. Bolt was trying to get to, getting a list of things that would be incorporated into the definition of tree. That's not an easy task. I do understand that.
It's because, you know, if you look down to 716, number 2, shrubbery is called out. And so I'm thinking that it gets very vague, you know, I mean, shrubbery typically is intentionally planted versus weed trees, which are not,
Yeah.
or invasive. Right, it's on our land, but still,
Yeah, I think it may be inelegant and, but I think because we were trying to make this distinction between shrubs that folks can't prune and shrubs that are theirs and they can. The way that is handled is there has to be something tied to the tree definition. But we could try to incorporate something, but I think that's why Ron was
All
hoping
right.
to get a
I-
list of
are we-
shrubs.
Are we clear that it looks to me, just as this is drafted, that this is not intended to apply in a right-of-way adjacent to a home?
The tree definition is, the shrubbery is not.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Because of this,
The shrubbery,
this is almost sounding like a
gonna say
Monty
that right?
Python thing, isn't it?
the limits on pruning shrubbery are only on town parcels.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the limits to pruning trees are for both rights of way and town parcels.
Correct.
So I think that's a fairly elegant compromise. However, we may want to consider some additional flexibility to protect special specimens.
Mhm.
I think personally that we should get this out into the public soon. Because the most important thing here is communication and to
Mhm.
help our residents understand the objectives and what we're trying to do and get their input and not have it be a surprise that we are limiting their maintenance of the right of way adjacent to their property.
Only with respect to trees.
Right, but based on what they currently think they have control over, or in the current ordinance gives
Mhm.
them control over, this is a change. So I just think that getting this draft a little bit more out there in the public by introducing it, not tonight, we've already decided we're not going to tonight, but soon, just to make sure people are really aware of it before we take it to final decision. Because ultimately, what we hear from people about the practicalities of how they're managing the right of way in front of their home could help us make our final language decisions.
Okay, well, it may be easier, frankly, to define planted than tree. Just define it as planted by the town. Because there's apparently a concern that if a bird drops something in the
Right.
right of way.
Yeah, I had pointed
Right.
that out to the resident who had concerns, and that did not seem to alleviate those concerns.
Well, and the reason for that is valid because when the consultant did the inventory, when the comprehensive arboretum plan was done in 2018, 2019, that we brought in an outside consultant,
Mhm.
not our in-house arborist, to do that inventory. And literally they tagged and numbered everything in the right of way. So any shrub in the
Right.
right of way of a specific size got
Mhm.
tagged. And so it's been actually a 5-year process of sort of rebalancing
Okay.
that. And so I think that is why some people have some concerns about that.
Two questions. I'm curious, like in that Arboretum plan, I wonder if they had any sort of industry standard definition on what a tree was. If that could help, like with kind of defining it here.
Well, for purposes of that portion of the contract, they were told to tag and inventory trees of greater than 2 inches caliper, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Does that sound
I
right?
don't remember off the top
I
of my
think.
head, but it was of a
2
certain
inches
size.
caliper is a measure at breast height.
Mhm.
You go up with a caliper
Mhm.
rather than trying to figure out the circumference.
It's
or
basically
trying-
like this,
Yeah.
like this. So,
Um, Whether in an excess of enthusiasm, they also tag shrubs. If they did, then we need to deal with that. But
It may have been that they tagged more invasive trees that
Yeah.
the town
Yes.
didn't really necessarily think,
Absolutely.
realize it owned.
Yep.
Before.
yeah, I think that was the case over like the lot that the Pratts put up for sale, the one that had, it was the gap lot between Chevy houses over on Rokeby that must have 50 or 100 trees, maybe I'm exaggerating, in the front right away that I think most of them would be not of much value, but they, you know, they were kind of growing up a little thick. I don't know if they tagged everything over there, but it kind of led to my, or kind of as a segue, to my other question. Is there anything that we're doing now that kind of makes it easier for the town to remove invasives that are in the right of way, even if the resident has a fondness for them, which I think happens a lot. And then, you know, if it doesn't, like, is there any, you know, what are the pros and cons of including that?
Well, it's not necessary, and I wouldn't advise doing it in an ordinance. What's happening as a practical matter is that the arborist marks them because there is a program underway to remove small invasive shrubs mostly,
Mhm.
some trees from the right of way. And it goes in fits and starts, but it's certainly well enough along that I think we could characterize it as an ongoing program. The arborist marks it with red paint and a sign is put up to notify. And it's typically a small area. So the sign is immediately adjacent to the marked shrubs, and it says that they're going to be removed. And occasions where an adjacent homeowner or anyone else objects, the arborist typically consults with them, and typically they realize that it's going to benefit everyone to have these things out of there. Barbara, correct me if I've mischaracterized any of that.
No, you've described it perfectly.
Okay. In any event, it's something that probably should have started 25 years ago, but it is now underway. It's been, I think, 99.9% successful. I don't think it needs memorializing or even mentioning in the context of an ordinance.
Right,
Okay.
it's something that
If it's
we
working,
usually
yeah.
talk about each year in our budget as part of the activities for the
Yeah.
last few years for the Arboretum Committee budget, for the Arboretum budget. Since the resident who raised it is in the room, I did want to mention that on page 2, it does specify that residents who wish to have pruning conducted in the right-of-way adjacent to their property should submit a written request to the town manager, clerk treasurer. So could that be an email?
Sure.
Okay. Is that clear enough? Resident Ken? Sure, since you're the only one here. Thank you. So if we're relatively comfortable with this, we've already decided we're not introducing it tonight. We're preparing ourselves to introduce substantially the same document in March. There is an Arboretum Committee meeting this week. I'll mention on Wednesday night, the 12th, if
I
weather willing.
think it's the 18th. Is it the 12th?
I believe it's the 12th.
It is.
Oh.
Yes, it is.
All right.
Weather willing, it's possible the committee may provide some minor edits to the town manager before it gets introduced in March. So I'd like to suggest if we're done discussing tonight,
Sorry.
there's plenty of opportunity between now and March to give more input before it gets introduced.
And Phil Normandy's seen this language and he's okay with it.
Phil Normandy has been
He's
very
the
much
genesis.
involved with helping to review it and inform it, as has the Arboretum Committee. They've had several chances to review it.
I suppose it's
yes,
all
so-
three of these would introduce in March, then the variances, the building permits and the trees.
It is a lot all at once, but at least Arboretum has seen both the driveway one and
Mhm.
the tree right of way. I don't think they have seen the permitting changes yet. At
No,
least not all of them, maybe
they-
piecemeal perhaps.
they have not, just the piecemeal parts that they specifically requested.
Right.
Um, Is there a lack of parallel between B and C? B talks about a resident's desire to remove or prune a tree in the right of way. C says all pruning of trees must be performed by the town or a contractor. It's silent as to removal.
Isn't that just on our property or in the right of way? I don't think that's all trees.
I do agree, the way it's written, it is an improvement over the prior language, but it does still give the impression, if you read just B, that the homeowner could do their own removal. And that's contradicted by C. And C is, perhaps we could actually switch the order. And that might help, put C before B, and just make sure that that can be conformed, to make it clear that all pruning is performed by the town, and then say if a person removes or has the desire for a tree to be removed or pruned. I hate passive voice, but I think in this case, we don't want to give the impression that the resident will be doing that unless approved by the town. I mean, I think there is some pruning that probably residents are doing and it's fine, but the idea is that they should contact the town and the arborist or the company will come and do the pruning to make sure it's done correctly.
It also, it implies to me that you may have to pay if you want to get something.
Removed. If you want something removed and it's not, it's simply for your convenience versus a disease or risk factor, the town may say, we'll only agree to this if you pay for the removal.
Removing trees is expensive. I know
Well, it's
that.
not so much the removal, it's the pruning.
It says pruning or removal.
Pruning, because I'm thinking of a case right now where I've got a town tree that's beginning to overgrow one of my trees. And so I will be putting a request in to have the thing pruned back. But in that case, I wouldn't think I should have to pay for it.
It's in the town right away.
Oh, it's a town tree, yeah.
Yeah.
No, my tree, it overhangs the town right away.
I'll take that note back to the committee. My understanding is usually the requests for payment are related to removals, not for prunings.
Okay.
Yeah, it's worrisome because I think that a lot of citizens who move in and out of town, moving in especially, are not gonna know about this. And I don't know, they might inadvertently start pruning a tree. And I mean, the regulations are more stringent here than in many communities. And I think that's fine, but I wonder, I mean, if a citizen doesn't know about this, and they're gonna be charged $1,000 and the cost of pruning, that's concerning.
Wouldn't they make the request? Or if it's in their right of way, wouldn't we tell them what we're doing before we do it and send them a bill?
I'm going to be really blunt. We're trying to make this a little scary and strike a balance, because the biggest concern we have are contractors who are working on behalf of town employee or town residents who may not be as careful as we would like, and sometimes work a little bit with impunity. It's not the average homeowner who is just making sure that the tree limb isn't scratching their car that we're concerned about. So we're trying to strike that balance.
Have there been instances of contractors tearing down trees or heavily pruning
Yes,
to the point the trees die or something?
yes,
Multiple instances.
yes.
And that's for contractors working for homeowners?
For homeowners, yeah.
Okay.
Usually during construction.
So I think really like the law is if it's over the vertical plane of your lot, it's fair game by law for you. A lot of our trees
And
overhang.
that is true. That's the
Yeah.
thing. There is a balance here, because
Yeah.
a tree might be in the right of way, but the limbs might lean over into where you do have a fair
have a
right.
very
That
irritating
is
black walnut.
exactly
You're
my,
right.
my point,
Yeah.
because it would
Yeah, that's a
break,
good point.
would break the plane of that, so.
We're just trying to encourage homeowner communication with the town office before they undertake cutting actions on trees or other damaging actions on trees. And if we don't put some really strong language and the highest fines we can, then we're not going to have any luck going after the rare cases where parties are acting with impunity.
But I do think that in number C, we should define all pruning of trees in the right of way or owned by the town.
Well, that's a redundancy. If
Yeah.
they're in the right of way,
already up
they are
above.
owned by the
We
town.
have it someplace else. Okay.
There are some that are fuzzy, like the one Phil's
Yeah.
describing would be, I guess, to your west, Phil, and then the one I was describing is to my north, but it's in the pool parking lot, so it's not really right away either of those. And I guess, Ken, yours might be in the Porcupine Woods. That's not a right away either, so.
Well, I can't attend that meeting, unfortunately, but I really need to understand how or why we would want to get into the business of approving a contractor. We go to considerable lengths to have our contractors approved by DNR. so that
Right.
we can-
I think,
I think the contractor approved by the town, meaning it's a town contractor, is
yes,
the,
it
is
would
the
be one that
intent.
is on the permit, is listed on the permit. That's the
Okay.
one.
Yeah, it's our contractor, not a private party's contractor.
No.
Even if the private party ends up paying for it, they have to use our DNR approved
Correct.
contractor.
But it's only for trees that are not in the
That
private
are-
property's yard
Right, it's for
It's-
trees that are in the public right
Right.
of way.
and the town-owned properties and in
Correct.
the parking lots and in the Porcupine Woods or wherever else, right?
Correct.
So I just think that should be clear in the definition someplace.
I mean, you could just make it the town's approved contractor, just swap a couple words around it. And that would
Yeah.
give you,
Mhm.
I think, what everybody's looking for in that one.
And is it the intention of the Arboretum Committee to work up a approved list? We've never had one.
Of contractors?
No,
No.
of trees.
I'm sorry, because I was making some
Okay,
notes to make
yeah.
sure that I bring up the right things on Wednesday. Where are we now? that you're asking about?
The payment of costs necessary to install a replacement tree by the town. It
Oh, from the-
seems to me sufficient right there, but it goes on to say, from the town's approved list.
I agree with you. We could just stop it approved by the town.
Yeah.
I believe that that was just some generous additional language to point out that the arborist might offer a list of 3 options and say, would one of these be acceptable to you? But I don't think we have to go that far. I mean, it would probably happen that way in practice to make it a more congenial conversation, but we don't have to say all that in the ordinance.
All right, so where are we leaving this?
The goal is to introduce it in March.
And we're gonna show it to the Arboretum Committee next week or in 2 weeks.
They've
next
reviewed
week.
this already. They're going to look at it again
Right.
on Wednesday.
And then we'll submit
And
it in March.
I will try
right?
to make sure I get the notes discussed that we covered
Okay.
tonight.
Right.
Hopefully, there will be just enough snow that my event is canceled, but the Arboretum Committee goes ahead and I can come and give them a hard time in person. Okay,
There's a good chance of that as far
we
as
have,
I
we
can
have
tell.
enough on that. Have we beat that to death? Or,
Nay.
So can I just ask another question? I know it's a bit nitpicky, but how do utility contractors come into the mix on this? Because in theory,
I'm just gonna jump in here and say, we hope that as they come in,
Yeah.
they communicate with the town. Barb works very hard to,
They do.
and the arborist, to
Yeah.
establish and maintain communication with WSSC and Pepco and Washington Gas.
Yeah, and I will say Pepco has gotten much better. When I actually have an email I need to respond to, but they reach out. They do a lot of work with Davy Tree. So basically, they will give us the vegetation plan in the areas that they have concerned about. I share that information with Phil Normandy, and we will offer comments back to them. And they've tried to be very responsive. I think also recognizing, however, that they need to keep utility lines clear.
right.
Um,
So should there be an exception written into this? Or something?
I think by state law, they have the right to,
Oh, okay.
they can do what they want.
Yep.
But
okay.
they have, to Jerry's point, they really have tried to work with us and to consult with us.
Somehow.
Yeah, so it's a recent development. It's a work
Yeah,
in
but
progress.
both Barb and the arborist have worked to keep up communication between the utilities to reduce the surprises.
Thanks.
okay. That, we move to new business and we're actually at the right time. I can't believe it.
Okay.
Shocking.
Barb with town election?
So each year you all approve the election calendar. Our election this year will be on May 5th. I've reached out to the Citizens Association. They've kindly agreed to provide support as they have in the past. The date that we are looking at for the nominating meeting would be at 5:30 PM on Wednesday, March 19th. As some of you may recall, they changed the time to 5:30 as an experiment last year, and they'd like to stick with that.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I'll let you finish.
No,
and
oh,
then
that's
I'll-
fine.
well, Yeah.
It does make it a little,
I think
know
that
it
the
was a
world
little
was
challenge.
different last year
It
at
definitely,
5:30
yes,
PM in Garrett Park.
and I
than
can
it will
certainly,
be this year.
I agree.
I'll just say that.
I can certainly go back to them if you all have concerns about the 5:30 time and ask them to put it in the evening, which is more likely when people will be home from work. Since I suspect many people will be commuting who were not in the past.
Correct.
The deadline for submitting candidate nominations by petition would be a week later at 4 PM on Wednesday, March 26th. Basically, what we've been trying to do is to, even though the the charter talks about petitions signed by 10 registered voters and filed at least 21 days before the date of the town election. Practically, we need a little bit more time to do that. So we generally try to have the slate of candidates finalized slightly more than 30 days before the election, which is certainly helpful to the election judges as well as the town staff. The date of the candidates forum would be at 7:30 PM, which is the traditional time, and that would be on Wednesday, April 30th. As I understand it, there's a long tradition of having the candidates forum the Wednesday before the election. So those are kind of the key dates. I did include in the memo just because there may have been some questions about that. As you all know, we've worked with Electech for several years. There was an issue last year where the scanning equipment was basically left inadvertently in test mode. So I did have some discussions with Electech about what the process would be to avoid a repeat occurrence. Jerry, jumping back to the issue that you raised in terms of the nominating meeting, does the group have any thoughts of whether you would want that to be at 7:30? I would go back to the Citizens Association and share that concern.
I mean, to be fair, they're hosting it, so I'm not gonna, I'm just making a suggestion. I'm not,
Okay.
you know, saying I would block
Okay.
their
Okay.
timing. I just think that, that maybe when they were planning this out, they weren't aware how different
Things were being-
people's schedules might be in
Okay.
March already. So just asking them to give that some consideration when
Okay.
they make their final plan for the time.
I think I would just also use this moment to reach out to everybody in hopes they can recruit a candidate for my position. Unfortunately, I need to devote some time to other things, and I have enjoyed my time on the council very much. But I think I would like to make an announcement that if anyone knows of someone seeking to or interested in running for the position, that I would very much welcome that, and I won't be running again.
It's been great working with you all this
thank
Sorry
time.
to hear that, Todd.
So is that firm, Todd?
I mean,
Well, no, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. We're
if
just-
there's no
we
one,
just-
if no one steps forward, I would certainly
Oh.
consider it. But I think that hopefully, you know, I think that others may be able to contribute in specific ways more than I have been able to. And so I would respectfully encourage that
Okay.
if you all know of somebody. But thank you. It's been very interesting, and I've enjoyed working with you.
I think
And I
it would be
hope-
good to put it out on the listener or something. Or just so people know that there'll be a spot open.
Okay,
And the bugle, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
okay, good.
Thank you for
Thank
your
you.
service, Todd.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Todd.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, we have a little more
I
time.
was gonna say, you still have
Sure,
like
but
3 months
sometimes,
left.
yeah.
Stuck with us for 1, 2, 3 more
Or
meetings.
if he raises enough trouble in the next 2 meetings, we'll say, nice to see you. Okay. No, Todd, we,
Yeah, it's all
So-
good.
So it sounds like there's general comfort with the proposed dates, other than my following up with the Citizens Association to share the concern about the 5:30 start time. Is that correct
yes.
with everybody?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yep.
thank you.
So, and I think we sort of covered this earlier. Barbara, did you have anything to add with respect to teeing things up for the next meeting on the 24th?
I guess specifically the reason this item is on the agenda is to make sure that, you know, I have pulled together whatever information you might want to be available. So if there are any specific information requests, data requests that you would like included in the, a response included in the agenda packet for the February 24th meeting, it would be helpful if you could share those tonight.
Are we starting at 7:30?
We will be starting at 7:30. That was my assumption.
Then I'll be here.
You'll be here? Yep.
I had a request that might be a multiple parter.
Mhm.
I think your presentations, the PowerPoint presentations are especially helpful to the process, but I think it hasn't been as much of an issue in recent years. But I remember back in the height of the pandemic being really alarmed by the spikes in operating budgets that were proposed, and there was a year that I think there was zero money put into the capital budget, and just seemed like questions weren't welcome at that point. But I think it would have been helpful then, and it probably would still be helpful now to just kind of see a 10-year history of how things have gone, like where perhaps like the revenues
Mhm.
have gone probably up, up and up, where operating has gone, and then where actual spends might be different
Okay.
than that. And then I think a fourth one would be like what our capital, because usually we have an idea of like what the capital budget contribution will be
Yeah.
aside from the operating. I think those things could be helpful. And if it's not too much to ask, it might even be helpful to see in the operating budget kind of, I can't remember the name for this type of chart, which is sad, being the husband of a statistician, but I can't, but like a chart where maybe it has like a vertical bar chart or horizontal where it has like the major categories. Maybe it's like the
Yeah.
staff salaries and all in like the benefits, and maybe like things for whatever kind of makes sense, where you might see 3 or 4 or 5 categories to kind of see if there's, even if say operating is going up in a certain
Mhm.
way, maybe there's a driver that would be kind of seen in there. So
Okay.
that's something I think would be on my wish list.
Anyone else have anything in mind that would be helpful?
Just one more thing before the resident in the audience who's raising his hand. I think we talked about this at the last work session, that at least for the budget meeting, having a little bit more breakdown of some of the subcategories than you normally provide in the town manager's financial report would be helpful. So for example, I'm thinking of the, the attorney fees versus the engineering professional fees. Some of those things, rightfully so, are lumped together in the manager's report from month to month. But when we're looking at the notes of building a budget for the
Mhm.
next year, having a better idea at that subcategory level of how you're estimating, even if ultimately we're going to spend at the higher category
Is that
level.
focus on professional fees? Is that the major
Particularly
one?
for professional fees, at the moment, I'm not thinking of another
Okay.
category where that's been an issue for me. I don't know if anybody else.
Professional fees is the one I
Professional
was
fees is the
thinking of, yeah.
biggest one, I
Okay.
think, where
Yeah.
you just kind of wonder like, what is all underneath that?
Okay, so are you asking for a look back or a look forward or both?
Just sort of what is informing your estimate?
Sure.
Kind of estimates for this category, estimates for that
Sure,
category,
okay.
based on your past experience, of
Okay,
course.
certainly.
If it's not too much trouble to do it as like a look back, it may be hard to dig up all that information, but if it's not hard to dig up, it might be useful to kind of see historically how things might have changed. There might be an occurrence that happened where maybe laws change, where we all of a sudden had to do things or didn't do things that we
Well, we had
weren't
the
weren't doing in previous
bond
years. Yeah.
issue for Penn Place.
That's going back a
That
long,
was
quite a while ago. And
chaotic,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
in recent years, it hasn't been much money because we paid most of it down.
Yeah. Something that just informs us on trends, I
Yeah.
guess, is still,
Okay.
I think would be helpful.
Please.
I think the mayor has to recognize.
Oh,
Recognize the
yes,
resident in the room.
the presiding officer recognizes the only person in the room.
This is not for me personally, this is for new buildings.
Mhm.
But I just wanted to have. You have a couple more issues. Very quick, so I just wanted to clarify a couple points. I believe that the attachments, Kayla, that I saw the attachments as to who mayoral candidates were for some of these committees, but if I'm not wrong, this were resolution. So who's going to be candidates?
Do you want mine, Jim? You're wanting to know who was nominated? It was Nancy Waltz and Carol Davies.
If someone is just willing to give
Carol.
Ken their hard copy.
Yeah, that's what I was
then
gonna say.
You wouldn't have to write it.
Yeah,
in.
you can have it.
That's
Okay. There
Good
were
use of paper.
two vacancies. Two vacancies. One was an expired term. One was a resignation. I've appointed Nancy Walls.
I thought Walls and Carol Davies were the archives.
No,
No,
archives,
Luke.
Bob Luke.
Bob Luke.
Am I correct that the Wiedemann documents were in the back?
They were.
yeah.
Yeah.
They-
Well, no, I'm
They
sorry.
were on the website.
They were on the
because they were
website.
too large. Yeah, not in the email.
Yeah.
Although,
That's,
The
Yeah.
third topic, it's come up in several council meetings, this stormwater management. It seems to be purposely vague. But I don't know if it's something you want to tell the town about. I wouldn't know how to write it up because it's also vague, it's meaningless as written. So if it's something that the community should know about, I think would be some benefit to being a bit more clear as to what this is all about in terms of the letter going to the county. But it doesn't say what the letter says. So I offer that.
to clarify the town's position vis-a-vis the county with respect to stormwater management, stormwater infrastructure.
But now the loss.
it is not, no, it's a communication to the
No,
county.
not at this juncture.
Not threatening the loss.
You're asking the wrong person. No, not threatening a lawsuit.
Asking the county responsibility. Or financial responsibility.
Yes.
In effect.
Thank you.
And I think there's a copy of the letter that the lawyer submitted to the county that we could send you a copy of, I'm sure. That lays out our arguments for why the county should be responsible. That would be helpful.
I'm not sure it's a public
I
document.
don't think sure it's- yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know either, but I know there's a
Yeah.
letter.
I don't think it's been made public.
We'll have to explore whether you have to file a PIA request. A gratuitous observation. The trouble with attorney-client privilege is if you breach it at all, it's gone. Okay. Anything further with respect to prep for the budget session? Okay, I will do this very quickly, in part because I'm not even sure where we stand at the moment. You'll recall that the county planning department proposed and sent to the county council a scheme for so-called accessible housing, which would have permitted, as a matter of right, duplexes and triplexes in single-family zoned municipalities, including in any single-family zoned area in the county. In those municipalities that were in a transit, there's a term of art. If you're within a mile of a MARC station or a metro station, then in addition to duplexes and triplexes, as a matter of right, quadplexes could be established and the parking requirement would be cut in half. Required parking would be cut in half. There were listening sessions. There was quite a bit of opposition exposed by residents throughout the county, although largely down county, No legislation has been introduced in specific furtherance of the accessible housing initiative. It, uh, it, because everyone acknowledges that housing and especially for affordable housing are a problem here in the county as elsewhere, but especially in the county, legislation has been introduced ostensibly to address that larger issue. As I believe it is proposed now, it affects only transit corridors. Jerry, I don't know if you've had a chance to follow, but correct me if I'm wrong. Transit corridors are defined also by the planning department, and essentially they're the big multi-lane roads in Garrett Park, such as Wisconsin Avenue, Rockville Pike, and Connecticut. And the transit corridor is a band of 500 feet on either side of those defined roads. As such, we are not affected. We
No,
intend
you said in Garrett Park, you meant in Montgomery County,
in Montgomery County. I'm sorry.
just to clarify.
Yeah. We aren't within 500 feet of either Connecticut or Rockville Pike, and Strathmore is not a transit corridor. We will continue to monitor this and continue, I think, out of a sense of just municipal comity, C-O-M-I-T-Y, because there's a lot of municipal comedy too, to participate in this with our fellow municipalities, many of which will be considerably impacted. When the planning board first presented its affordable housing initiative, there was considerable concern about the fact that this was not a zoning change. These would be permissible uses within the existing single-family zone. All of our land use controls are premised on a authority from the state that applies only in single-family zones. And therefore, if we had duplexes, triplexes, or quadplexes in town, those would not be governed by our setbacks, but by the county setbacks, which are more lenient. And this is true throughout Montgomery County with with municipalities that have enacted their own setbacks. So we are seeking at the state level to modify that threshold enabling legislation so that it is not keyed only to single family zones. That has been a very tortuous process. There is a bill introduced. It seems to have the support of all of the entities that should contribute to its success at the state legislature. Again, we simply need to monitor that. We have been participating in terms of going to meetings, participating in Zoom sessions, but also to assuming a portion of the legal costs in connection with drafting legislation and lobbying.
Do we have a budget amount for that?
No, it simply comes out of professional fees and you know, my opinion that is that in terms of potential impact on the fundamental nature of this community, the fees we're spending to try to make sure that it doesn't have an undue impact are quite modest.
And we're sharing it with all the other
Yes.
municipalities and we're fighting.
Yes.
Chris, were you planning to give a little bit of background on the introduction by Albarnez and
Sure, if you remember it.
Well, I have it in front of me. I don't, you know, I've been
Yeah.
sick during the time period that it was introduced, so I don't have a lot of background to offer. I
Okay.
just wanted to mention that at the county council level, a housing,
There's like an alternative idea, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
alternative package has been introduced. I emailed it to all of you, so
Yeah.
just encourage you to look at that. I don't think we have to go over the
Yeah.
details now.
Yeah, it's,
I don't know that we put it out to the public, though. I think I only shared it with the council.
Okay.
Because it hadn't yet been introduced and then I got sick.
that's Friedson and that,
Friedson and, I had the wrong name, I'm sorry. It was
And-
Andrew Friedson and Natalie Fanny Gonzalez.
okay. Kate Stewart has not bought onto that yet?
I don't know, to be
Okay.
honest. It was introduced by those
Let-
two members.
Okay. Let's try to find out
Yeah.
a little more about it
Yeah,
and
when
then
I have a little bit
publicize
of
it.
time this week, I'll try to draft something that
Okay,
we
I
can
hate to put
share
it
with
on you.
neighbors.
Yeah.
Yeah, or this weekend.
All right. Well, I don't know how much that's clarified anything, but that's the status of both are simply pending. We have to follow closely because the state legislature is in session only until early April. And the time frame at the council is not set.
Right, so just to very quickly summarize, the state action and the county action are independent, but they do affect each other. So the municipalities are very hopeful that the state action will move forward this session, but they could pick it up again next year if it doesn't get past this session. But in the meantime, the county could act and we could have a period of limbo where there's less clarity.
But you're not asking for our support of the other alternative that you put out for us.
The other alternative that I shared, I don't know enough about it yet. It was just introduced within the last 2
Yeah.
weeks.
It was really this, I think a couple of the county council members that didn't seem to have full buy-in on the duplexes, the quadplexes that they were proposing, like a different way to try to increase the quantity of housing. So
Yeah.
whether it gets any traction, we'll see.
Stephen, did you want to say a few words about the land use committee?
Yeah, I'm afraid I might not do it super well, so please take over if you feel me getting it off here. But in a nutshell, the mayor and I met with chairman of the Land Use Advisory Committee, has been serving on it for many years. I can't remember how many years now. To talk about some open questions we've had about Land Use Advisory Committee. And one of them is that it was originally set up as a 3-person body to, in theory, kind of review all the permits and then process the permits. It was never really, to my knowledge, said that it would be a research body at the same time trying to help the town navigate through issues like the ones we were just discussing with quadplexes and transit corridors, et cetera, et cetera. So it's something the chair and I had been discussing the last couple of years, but he wants to try to simplify some things and kind of decouple those two things to isolate what happens with, literally the flow of permits from from a land use advisory committee that really is advisory towards items that may be of interest in the town. But I don't think we've really totally figured out all the nuts and bolts of that. But is that a fair assessment?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that could be workable as long as the committee or the subcommittee, however we would frame it, that is responsible for advising the council on policy issues,
Mhm.
has enough insight and visibility on all the permitting actions so as to be able to provide the council advice about what is actually happening in our community as relates to permits. Unless permits have a variance, I don't see them. Or unless they have a tree issue that comes to the arborist and the committee, I don't see them. So I rely on the Land Use Advisory Committee to bring issues, policy issues related to land use to our attention or to advise us when we're considering changes. to the ordinances. So the only, if we are going to bifurcate, then I would recommend we set up some sort of procedures where the advisory group that's not actually processing the permits
Mhm.
gets full visibility on all the permit
Mhm.
actions.
I like that a lot. It's a great idea. And I wonder if maybe either in addition to it or maybe instead of like full visibility, and it might be good to have like a log of what all the permits are and the stats, like maybe to
Yeah,
kind of say,
something.
yeah, whether it's something about the side yard setback or if it's like how many decks or how many additions, how many are even close to the FAR or side setback. Because those are things that the chair and I have just discussed kind of just ad hoc over the years, like how infrequent it might be that we get anywhere near like the maximum buildable amount. So like those kind of things could be useful for that advisory committee to kind of know, hey, are we potentially in a trouble spot for where we might get pressure from developers to have more available or not. We're kind of seeing it as not anecdotally, but it might be good to kind of see it with real data.
Yeah, because the land use advisory committee would look at land use proposals writ large, like AHS, and anything such as the more locally, more specific to Garrett Park, such as the ordinances we've been discussing this evening. But I think it would be useful. The land use task force in 2011, give or take, recommended the posting of list of applications for permits. And it was maintained for a number of years and just sort of died out at some point. I think we might revive that and then ask the staff and or George Martin to sort of annotate them as to whether they the permit would result in a complete occupancy of the entire footprint, or that there was still a lot of room left, one thing and another. And then that could be something that would be taken into account if the advisory committee, the one, the broader gauge, could take into account that sort of thing.
That's something, I agree. Yeah, something along those lines.
Okay.
Just to make sure that that committee has enough information to be actually
Right.
advisory. And I do want to clarify, I do believe the town office staff in the town manager's report does month by month report permits approved,
Yes.
but it's not in a form that could be used as data, as you just described, by an advisory committee.
Okay. Archives committee. Phil, did you have anything to?
Yes, just a couple of quick things. So our archivist is in the process of reprocessing Garrett Park Elementary School collection and continuing to update the finding aids for the town council committee and meeting minutes. Also, she received the Marion Green collection, so all the good stuff, which ought to be very interesting. And sent out 8 files to be transcribed. We've got somebody who lived in town here who transcribed a lot of the audio recordings, especially some of the older ones from when we did interviews of various people, locally famous people, if you will. She was she was a school judge for National History Day and supported 2 research requests, attended a virtual history conversation sponsored by MoCo Historical Society. Separate but unequal, the history of school segregation in MoCo.
Very good. Were there any further updates from any council members? All right. at the stroke of 9:44. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded?
I'll second.
Very good.